Shadows of figures shuttled between the mountains of the way, moving in the same direction. There seemed to be a mountain range connected together, forming a mountainous island in the sea of the path. That ethereal Fey palace seemed to be standing on top of the mountain peak. Shadows of figures shuttled between the mountains of the way, moving in the same direction. There seemed to be a mountain range connected together, forming a mountainous island in the sea of the path. That ethereal Fey palace seemed to be standing on top of the mountain peak. There seemed to be the destination that was pursued by everyone. Everyone's speed was incredibly fast. Futian and his group shuttled through the sky. Above the void, demonic magic came in waves, and Luo Yuming, who had been following them closely before, glanced beneath him. His body was surrounded by a demonic will of death, shrouding the sky while countless death currents turned into death spears. Luo Yuming's finger pointed downward, and instantly, many death spears traversed the void, slaughtering toward the disciples of Taishan Mountain. They were extremely savage and decisive. It seemed that the progeny of old demon Luo from the divine capital of Xiling had inherited his overbearing characteristics. Wan Shuyi looked up in the sky as the sword will above his head screamed. His finger pointed at the void, and countless sharp swords broke through the air, cleaving through the sky. They collided with the death spears. At the same time, other cultivators of Taishan Mountain made their strikes one after another, defeating the attack. Their eyes were cold and indifferent. They weren't expecting that Luo Yuming would move against them. Luo Yuming stepped into the void, and the great path boomed. Demonic death will roared wildly in the void, and it was not just him. Behind Luo Yuming, 10 other demonic cultivators of the Nirvana realms simultaneously released Will of the Way. The demon might above the sky grew stronger until it enveloped the heavens. Boom! A huge visage appeared above the sea of the path, like the face of the true god of death. This dark face shot out rays of darkness that directly penetrated everyone's eyes, so that all the disciples of Taishan Mountain had the will of death in their eyes. This death will directly invaded their bodies and turned into death currents that drilled them deeply. At the same time, the booming sounds came out, and giant spears of infinite darkness condensed to manifest like a sharp mountain of death. They slammed down at those who were from Taishan Mountain. Watch out, Junmu said. His body rocketed toward the sky. He drove his blasts at one of the death mountains. All 15 cultivators of Taishan Mountain spread out, each facing the battle to destroy the death mountain. However, they were separated by distance, so they were far from one another. Take care of Shen Jing and the others. Wan Shuyi shouted as he elevated into the air to split open the death mountain. Shen Jing and Little Phoenix were weaker. If they were separated, he was afraid they might not be able to withstand such an attack. You two get close to me. Shen Jing, accompany my Guqin. Feng Yan, come to me, Li Jing called out. The Guqin spirit appeared in front of her, and her fingers were ready to pluck the strings. However, at this moment, the sound of Guqin was already heard, and a loud chime of phoenix rang throughout the void, high-pitched and melodious. Read more chapter on novel full. Although Li Jing was a little jealous of Yi Futian's cultivation at the string pavilion, her nature was extraordinary, after all, and she did not take it too seriously. Now that all the disciples from Taishan Mountain were under the same attack, they ought to unite as one. Thus, she allowed for Shen Jing and Feng Yan to get close to her. However, Li Jing did not expect that before she even started playing, the music she had wanted to perform was already ringing in her ears. Glorious divine light shone, and Yi Futian seemed to bath in its divine beauty, as the illusion of the phoenix appeared and surrounded him, turning it into a wondrous sight. The body of the little phoenix swayed upward, making a clear sound of phoenix chiming. It integrated into one with the Guqin with powerful penetrating power, as if to resonate with Yi Futian's music. Flight of the Phoenix Pair, Li Jing thought. It was an incredibly pure rendition of Flight of the Phoenix Pair. Each note seemed as if it were sung by the phoenix, and with every beat, a phoenix was born again from the ashes. Rays of radiant divine light rushed into Feng Yan's body, and the mood relayed by the Guqin completely fell on her body. The glory of divine light was extremely dazzling, and when both of her wings opened, the sky and the sun were shielded. A breath of divine fire appeared from her mouth, which completely dispersed and burned up the infinite death currents in the sky. We came today to seek the way. Don't waste time on them, Futian said. Though they were in mid-battle, their forward momentum had not been stopped. They were still maintaining an incredible speed, though they were still lagging behind the others. After several consecutive attacks failed, Luo Yoming's eyes were cold and hard. He continued moving forward without being too obsessed with the fighting. After all, they also knew the main purpose of this visit, thanks to Futian's reminder. The demonic cultivators in the void, and the people of Taishian Mountain below moved forward in tandem. The breaths from their bodies roared, as if they could erupt into great battle at any moment. But Li Jin and Chunyu were not feeling serene. Futian had always appeared extremely modest. However, the music that he played at that moment had given birth to an unnatural vision. The music of Flight of the Phoenix pair penetrated the void, which even Li Jin could not accomplish. Obviously, Futian had not wasted his time at the string pavilion. He had practiced hard in the art of the guqin, and had learned the famous Flight of the Phoenix pair in its entirety. It seemed that they had ignored the modest Shinjing. Not bad. Perfect concealment that you have accomplished this famous piece. No wonder Uncle Lan gave this spot to you. Wan Shuyi, riding the sword in the air, laughed heartily at Futian. Now, even he had come to realize that Futian was not ordinary. This Flight of the Phoenix pair still amazed him. In this way, he and Feng Yin cooperated with one another. Thus, they were able to protect themselves. Passing through all those mountains of the way, some had already stepped onto the giant island in the sea. Some stopped momentarily, while some continued to move forward. Except for those top characters who had been given a spot, Futian also saw a group of people climbing the mountain. They were surely the disciples who were selected to cultivate in the divine palace this time. Futian leaped and landed on the mountain of the way. A thick will of the way rushed to him, as if this mountain range was a very pure mountain of the great path, containing the infinite will of the great path. After descending on the mountain of the way, the group moved forward like lightning. Little Phoenix's eyes were full of excitement, staring at a lonely peak in the distance. There seemed to be a divine tree of flames, with flame-colored fruits growing on it. An extremely rich will of the flaming great path was released from it, rendering the whole mountain peak red as the flames. Its temperature was extremely high. Fruits of the way, Futian whispered. He had done some research before coming here. It was rumored that the fairy mountain where the divine palace was located was a land of treasure, nurtured by the great path of heaven and earth. It was able to produce magical objects such as the fruits of the way. Little Phoenix rushed over there, Futian following close behind. Some people were in the same direction as they were, but there were others heading toward other places. There was more than one place on this mountain that nurtured fruits of the way. Watch yourselves, Wan Shuyi shouted at Futian and Little Phoenix, reminding them. He and Luoyue were going in the other direction, clearly with different targets. Soon Futian came to the mountain. He saw that the surrounding space was filled with an extremely hot airflow, which seemed to be able to incinerate all things. The flame-colored mountain peak transmitted an unusually high temperature. The sap of the path tree was like magma. Boom! The will of flame erupted, and Little Phoenix rushed directly inside. Her body was bathed in the glory of the divine flames. Futian was the same. With flames burning on his body, he rushed inside as well. His body was still swallowing and absorbing will of the flames. But at this moment, a powerful pressure of the great path came down, and a giant flaming palm print appeared on the sky, slamming down through the air. The dazzling flaming palm print could incinerate everything. It aimed toward Futian and Little Phoenix. This was the land of proving the way of the divine palace, but it was also a place of controversy. Where there were opportunities, competitions would ensue. The greater the opportunity, the stronger the competition. Buzz! Futian's body turned into a flash of lightning. The sword light appeared, and a sliver of the sky appeared in the heaves. The sky had been cleaved. With a popping sound, the giant fiery palm of flame was directly split in two, from the middle. Futian stood in front of Little Phoenix, and looked up to the place not far ahead. A red-haired old man bathed in fire with aggressive eyes, staring at him and Feng Yin. Little Phoenix's eyes were full of flames as she stared at the old man. A slight disagreement, and he made a killer move. This old man was seriously savage. However, the old man smiled and appeared extremely friendly, completely without the nastiness that he displayed just moments ago when he went for the kill. Young friend, your swordsmanship is quite good. There are 3 fruits of the way on this tree. And here we are, exactly 3. How about 1 each? The old man said with a smile. He had fought his way from the crowd this time, and took the identity of an ordinary disciple. Hence the opportunity to come here. It was an opportunity to test himself. Great. Yi Futian nodded with a smile, readily agreeing. If so, you 2 little friends can pick first. The old man's smile was still kind and friendly. He let Yi Futian and his people choose first. Little Phoenix, you choose, Yi Futian said. Little Phoenix nodded, and her figure flickered toward the ancient tree of the great path ahead. Yi Futian looked at the old man with a smile. While Little Phoenix was getting closer to the path tree, Yi Futian was still staring at him. The old man's expression didn't waver, but the surrounding atmosphere seemed to have fluctuated faintly. Boom! A surge of dark red flame erupted instantly. It gave out a great sense of danger, and the old man instantly launched his attack on Little Phoenix. However, at this moment, he felt the resistance of the great path of space, and then Yi Futian moved, traveling through the void. The old man suddenly turned around and raised his hands to blast toward Yi Futian. The giant dark red palms were like grinding discs that were directly locked onto Yi Futian's body. It was extremely accurate, as it was right where Yi Futian reappeared as he emerged from the void. Buzz! Yi Futian, using a finger as a sword, struck out and created a terrible vortex of swordsmanship in front of him, cutting through the void. Instantly, the terrible palm print was shattered into nothingness. Yi Futian's finger continued forward as the old man's expression turned to one of alert, and he attempted to retreat. But Yi Futian was moving fast and arrived in an instant. The sword finger penetrated the old man's entire body with the air of the swordsmanship. He looked down at his own body as his eyes were filled with fear. How ruthless! The old man viciously looked toward Yi Futian, and with a popping sound, his body was pulverized into nothing while Swordwell was still raging. Little Phoenix picked the fruits of the way, and handed 2 fruits to Yi Futian, saying, "This phoenix will reward you 2 fruits." But her eyes were fixed on the fruits. She seemed a little peckish. Yi Futian smiled and took only 1, telling her, "As your elder, I have to take care of the kids. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Little Phoenix stared firmly at Yi Futian. Even when she realized how powerful he was, she still did not bother to be polite to him. She tossed 2 fruits of the way into her mouth. Little Phoenix stared firmly at Yi Futian. Even when she realized how powerful he was, she still did not bother to be polite to him. She tossed 2 fruits of the way into her mouth. In a flash, flame light was burning all over her body, like she was a goddess of fire. A burst of terrifying divine fire light filled the air. Little Phoenix stretched out, as if she was enjoying the sensation. Is it really so magical? As Yi Futian watched her response, he threw a piece of fruit of the way into his mouth as well. In an instant, he could feel the blood boiling in his veins as they burned. His body involuntarily resonated with the worldly great path of flames. Endless flame will flowed through him. His veins seemed to turn into flowing magma, burning eternally. His organs were wrapped in flames, and even his bones were branded with the mark of fire. This reaction continued for a while before it ended. The disturbances with him disappeared, and fire of the great path shot out of his eyes. "Divine fruit," gasped Yi Futian. He looked at the divine tree of flames. What kind of place was this? My father said that the fruit in this place was grown directly from the great path, once every 10 years. People who have cultivated up to the peak of the nirvana level can use the fruit to attune themselves to the rotation of the great path, create their bones and blood out of the great path, and form a body of the great path. A Renhuang's body and soul are always in accord. Once you have created a divine wheel of the great path, you will truly become a Renhuang, said Little Phoenix. Your father has taught you much, said Yi Futian with a smile. They walked forward as they talked, both of their figures flashing as they did so. He was already an unblemished saint, and was only one level away from reaching nirvana. He naturally wished to understand the Renhuang plane. That was another level. Countless saint-level heroes wanted to reach that plane, but it was extremely hard. One needed to forge a Renhuang body, realize a Renhuang soul, and finally meld the two together, forming a divine wheel of the Great Path. The divine wheel would turn in accord with the river of the Great Path, as it flowed through heaven and earth. It would shine with the sun and the moon, and live as long as the world. As long as you were not killed, you would never die. He understood how the master had been reborn back at the Dali dynasty, and how he had stood back up after he had broken through to the next level. He had recognized his Renhuang soul, so although his physical body had been so heavily damaged that it could not recover, his soul already had touched the Renhuang plane, and afterward, it had reshaped his flesh. Finally, in the celestial gate of vast heaven in the heavenly mandate realm, he had forged a divine wheel of the Great Path, and entered the Renhuang realm. And this fruit seemed to be able to give people a chance to forge a Renhuang body, thereby lessening the difficulty of proving oneself. Thus, countless people wanted to come here, as it was a step on the road to becoming a Renhuang. After eating the fruit, Futian suddenly felt a little bit greedy. Although he had not yet reached nirvana, even at the unblemished saint level, he could establish a foundation for what would come after. After the fruit had been digested, he could already feel real changes happening. Perhaps this would help him reach nirvana ahead of schedule. Read more chapter on Novelful. Moreover, even if he did not need it, Yaya did. At that moment, the sound of fighting broke out in many places. The mountain range was vast, and he could faintly see other divine trees. Quickly, Phoenix also seemed to be excited by the hint of sweetness that she had tasted, and rushed off in a certain direction. There was a trembling golden tree on the mountainside. Every leaf seemed to have been forged of pure gold. They emitted a clear sound every time they shook. Even the ground around the tree was golden. There were 4 cultivators fighting wildly off to one side. Whoosh! At that moment, they all felt something, and they suddenly turned their gazes. They saw the figure of a sword piercing through the sky. It cut down one of the pieces of fruit, then continued, forming a magnificent arc. It cut down 2 more pieces of fruit. All of the fruit fell upon the sword. Space will enveloped it. The sword turned back, as if it knew what would happen if it lingered. The 4 cultivators' expressions changed, and they stopped fighting. Someone had actually taken the opportunity, presented by them fighting to seize some of the fruit. That was simply outrageous. One of them lashed out with a giant golden palm print that covered the sky. However, the sword was incredibly quick. It pierced through the air, and at the moment that the palm print came down, it crossed through space, making the palm print fall upon only empty air. The 4 cultivators stepped forward, and saw that the sword had returned to the hands of a youth wearing white robes. What was more outrageous was that the white-robed youth had opened his mouth wide, and swallowed each piece of fruit one after another. What? Little Phoenix stood to his side watching him. Was his mouth really that big? Could he eat an entire piece of fruit in one bite? A crisp crunching sound rang out, as Futian chewed the fruit. It was incredibly tough. His teeth ground it up, and once the fruit went into him, his body shone with brilliant golden divine light. It was like he had transformed into a golden body of the Great Path. The 4 cultivators watched him in shock, staring at him fixedly. Burp! Futian belched, and flames rose up in the 4 pairs of eyes that were watching him. Their murderous intent swept out through the air. I've eaten this fruit. There is more right in front of you. You take this opportunity to grab what is left, said Futian as he gazed at them from across the distance. Shameless, incredibly shameless. Beside him, little Phoenix blushed so red that the heat from her face could have boiled water. It was fine that he had plundered the fruit, but to eat it all right there made her ashamed to be seen with him. Do you have a death wish? One of the cultivators asked coldly. A golden halberd pierced through the air towards Futian. Terrible golden beams of light shot out in all directions, causing a terrible shrieking sound to ring out. They knew that they should be using this time to pick more fruit, but they could not stomach his insolence. Futian's body turned golden and indestructible. A golden river seemed to flow through him. Even his world tree life spirit turned into a golden divine tree that flickered with golden light. He brought his hands together, and a golden palm print appeared in the sky. The fist clenched, and it smashed down into the oncoming golden halberd. The golden palm print was destroyed, but the golden halberd shattered inch by inch as well. "If you keep wasting time, you will end up with nothing," said Futian innocently. Their faces all darkened. This man was actually quite strong. He was able to withstand a Nirvana-level cultivator's attacks. "Let's go. We'll come back and get him later," said one of them. "Fine, why don't we temporarily make an alliance?" said another one of them. The four of them turned away, still talking among themselves. The four people who had just been fighting over a piece of fruit had instantly turned into allies. "This, amazing," thought Futian. At that moment, Little Phoenix was amazed by how thick he was. "Is it good?" Little Phoenix stared at him angrily. He had not even left one piece for her. "That was too much. You have cultivated flames. What are you looking at?" said Futian disdainfully. Other than making him feel a little full, the fruit did indeed make him feel good. Not long before, he seemed to have forged veins of divine fire within his body, which had then turned golden. "Shameless," said Little Phoenix contemptuously. "Let's go." Futian flashed up into the sky. He was prepared to plunder some more. In addition to the people who were allowed to be here due to the quota, there were also some ordinary disciples in the palace. They had probably wanted to give them a chance, but most of these disciples were of no real account, and many of them would probably fall here. However, this was their own choice. The road to proving one's worthiness was difficult. The fruit only bloomed once every 10 years, and there were not many of them. It was impossible to divide it all up among them. Even the disciples of this palace had to fight for the right to divide the fruit up among themselves. Many disciples came here to fight for the fruit, and they would have to compete with the top figures of the higher heavens realm, who were part of the quota. Futian was not the only one plundering fruit. There were some other powerful figures doing the same thing. For example, when some of those top forces who had been part of the quota walked together, the ordinary disciples of the divine palace had to join together to even have a hope of beating them. Moreover, there were some incredibly powerful beings here. For example, Gai Shur was leading the group of cultivators from the Golden Divine Nation. He was holding a divine golden spear that was casting rays of divine light. When he saw someone ahead of him plundering the fruit, he stepped forward through the air and called out, "Leave the fruit there." As he said this, he thrust his golden spear through the air. As it fell, golden light pierced the sky. The person below him who had taken the fruit tried to block it, but the brilliant golden light was too overpowering. It shattered his defenses and pierced into his body, pinning him to the ground. The other cultivators of the Golden Divine Nation seized the fruit, even stealing the piece that the man had held in his hand. The people of the Divine Swordly family were also incredibly overpowering. They rode a sword through the air, moving at their fastest speed in order to seize as much of the fruit as they could. In addition, the cultivators of the Sky-Burying God clan were there. They could summon starry steels to crush everything beneath them, which made them very powerful. And either intentionally or unintentionally, the cultivators of the Divine Swordly family and the Sky-Burying God clan were advancing in different directions and clashing with each other. One of the cultivators of the Divine Swordly family looked off into the distance. "The fruit of that tree is shaped like swords." He suddenly moved very quickly, turning into a sword and rushing over to it. At the same time, Wan Shuyi Luoyue and the others saw it as well. They moved as quickly as lightning, turning into swords and racing over towards the tree. An inexhaustible flow of sword will appeared around the tree, wrapping around it. It wrapped around the fruit itself very thickly, giving it the shape of a sword. Divine sword light shone from high above as many swords descended from the sky, cutting towards Wan Shuyi and Luoyue. "Forgive us for crushing your swords beneath our feet," came Li Sun's voice. They were the ones who had sent the swords to crush the people of Taishian Mountain. Many people were saying that Lord Taishian was the most powerful figure in the higher heavens realm now. "Destroy those swords and be careful." Wan Shuyi's sword chi surged as he slashed with his sword, forming a line through the sky. His sword collided with the oncoming swords, and in a flash, the crashing sword will seemed like it would split the very air itself. An astonishing airflow was left behind where the sword had passed. The cultivator from the divine swordly family waved his hand, and suddenly, countless swords cut at Wuxia. Each sword arrived in an instant, seeking to bury Wuxia within them. The intensely powerful flow of sword qi in this area naturally attracted the attention of many people. Futian looked over there from across the distance. There was a clash of swords going on there. If the fruit there had anything to do with swords, he needed to have it. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. In front of the ancient tree of swordsmanship, Li Sun thrust his sword through the air. He formed countless afterimages as he moved, and more swords appeared in an instant, until Wuxia was enveloped in sword qi. In front of the ancient tree of swordsmanship, Li Sun thrust his sword through the air. He formed countless afterimages as he moved, and more swords appeared in an instant, until Wuxia was enveloped in sword qi. Wuxia activated his sword spirit, which shrieked as the sword will billowed out into the sky. He placed one finger upon his sword, and drew the blade across it. Flesh blood flowed out of his finger, and was absorbed into the sword. Warrior spirit. Wuxia's hair flew in the wind as the sword qi within his sword spirit grew stronger. Countless sharp swords whistled through the sky, turning into a terrifying vortex of swords that cut through all the afterimages around him. There were endless cracking sounds as the afterimages were destroyed one after another. The remaining images returned to Li Sun, and he appeared in the air above Wuxia. He was holding a sword as well. He looked down and said quietly, "Eternal." As he said this, the sword will around Wuxia materialized into actual divine swords. Each of these swords was shining with brilliant light. The Divine Li family's instant swords and eternal swords were in perfect harmony. A terrifying sword seal appeared on Li Sun's brow. He gripped his sword with both hands, and an incomparably brilliant beam of divine sword light pierced through the air. It fell from the sky, making all the other swords resonate with it as it shot down towards Wuxia. The sword had not even come into its full power yet, and just its sword will was enough to place a suffocating pressure on the space below it. The sword spirits in front of Wuxia shrieked. He looked up into the sky, his hair dancing wildly in the wind. Up there in the air, Li Sun looked like the descendant of a sword god. This was the sword of the divine swordly family. They had always considered themselves to be the best swordsmen in the higher heavens realm. There was no one who could compare to them. Whoosh! Terrible divine sword light blew all around Wuxia. His blood flowed from his body into his sword. It was as if his internal aura was pouring into the sword. He grew weaker and weaker, but his mind was seeking the path, and he was deep in thought. He had wanted to find an opportunity to prove his worthiness. Now the sword-shaped fruit was right in front of him. If he could not win this battle, how could he speak of proving his worthiness? The sword spirits above him trembled violently. A series of destructive sword cut marks appeared, sweeping up into the sky, and trying to destroy the sword prison that his opponent had set up. The swords around Wuxia all broke, cut in half by his sword spirits. Li Sun's gaze grew sharp. He looked down at Wuxia and said, "Your fleeting divine sword technique is incredible. Unfortunately, your swordsmanship level is not high enough." As he said this, divine radiance bloomed from him. His body transformed into a divine body of swordsmanship. The terrifying sword will in the sky transformed into a single falling sky sword. All of the sword will in the area flowed wildly into this sword. All of the other swords shrieked as they resonated with it. Even the swords that the other cultivators of the Li family were holding resonated. The falling sky sword was like a king among swords. All other swords were its subjects. "A divine sword apocalypse," said everyone as they looked up into the sky. The other cultivators that had resisted the Li family, Luoyue, and the disciples of Taishan Mountain, stared up at the sword. The top sword technique of the divine swordly family was truly apocalyptic. When the sword came out, all other techniques were destroyed, the air itself was split, and everything turned to dust. At that moment, the clouds fled as the sword qi crossed through the sky. It was as if the only thing in the world was that sword. Its sword will grew stronger and stronger. Down below, Wan Shuyi could feel an immense amount of pressure. The flow of sword qi around him was distorted by it, and his own swords were shattered. Sword cuts appeared in his robes, and blood began to pour out of them. "Give up, Wan Shuyi," Junmu called out to him. Wan Shuyi could not last long under this sword. If he continued to persist, he would very likely be destroyed. The divine swordly family was so strong, and they had their hearts set on the sword-shaped fruit. If anyone else wanted it, they would have to fight them for it. Given Li Sun's skill at swordsmanship, it would be difficult for anyone else to defeat the divine swordly family. And Wan Shuyi did not even need the sword-shaped fruit. It was not worth this fight. But Wan Shuyi still held his sword, and did not give up. There was a fierce determination in his eyes. He could accept being defeated in battle, but to put down his sword and hang his head in submission was not something he could accept. At that moment, there was the faint sound of music, which made a look of surprise come over the faces of everyone on the battlefield. There were two figures floating there. One of them was wearing white robes, and he descended in front of Wan Shuyi. He was holding a guqin in his hands and playing a song. In a flash, countless notes erupted full of harsh will. They seemed to be perfectly in accord with the mood on the battlefield. Junmu frowned. It was Shenjing. What was he trying to do? As the notes erupted, strange illusions appeared everywhere. The wind and the clouds surged, and sword will flowed into the sky. The notes seemed to flow into Wan Shuyi's mind, from which they entered into his sword. Worldly judgment. Li Jiyin and Chen Yu, the disciples of Guqin Valley, looked shocked. Strange illusions were appearing in the sky, and the great path was flowing backward. This was one of the famous songs, Worldly Judgment. Flight of the Phoenix Pair was not the only one of the 6 famous songs of String Palace that Yi Futian had learned. He had also learned Worldly Judgment as well. Such skill. Thinking of how he had once given pointers to Yi Futian and told him to study hard in String Palace, Li Jiyin felt embarrassed. Apparently, Shen Jing's musical skill was far greater than she had thought. Even she was not as good as him. He had learned 2 of the 6 famous songs, Flight of the Phoenix Pair and Worldly Judgment. That being said, Uncle Lan must have included Yi Futian in the quota on purpose, so that he could support them with his guqin music and make them stronger. But they had thought it was just to let Fourth Miss save some face. The guqin music seemed to accord with Wan Shuyi's swordsmanship perfectly. Wan Shuyi seemed to feel the sword will around him getting stronger, and countless images of swordsmen floated in his mind. His sword clattered as the sword light that was spilling out of his sword spirits made the will of the great path surge all around him. Why can I sense a bit of the song of the lost divine? Could it be that the rumors are true? Worldly judgment itself evolved from the song of the lost divine? Said Li Jiyin. She still remembered when she had heard her master playing the song of the lost divine. It was imprinted on her memory. Not only that, but it seems to be perfectly matching the sword will. She felt like she was in a dream. A look of shock also came into Luiwa's pretty eyes. The guqin and the sword were in tandem, and produced a certain resonance. She remembered that her father had once said that Lord Taixian had been able to rapidly advance to the next level because he obtained the song of the lost divine. His understanding had increased, and he had integrated the song into his other abilities. For example, when he had integrated it into his swordsmanship, he had created the shocking sword matrix, known as the fleeting divine sword. At that time, she had doubted that a song could really be so magical. But now that she saw the guqin music and the swordsmanship working in tandem and resonating together, she realized that she had been wrong. The great path was connected to everything, and extremely powerful cultivation methods, even musical ones, could reach it. Up in the sky, the thousands of swords moved as one, merging into a single sword. Li Sun seemed to have realized that something was wrong. He pointed at the sword and yelled, "Fall!" When he said this, the sword fell from the sky, smashing everything beneath it. Sword marks appeared all around as everything was destroyed. Wan Shuyi watched the sword fall. An incomparably brilliant sword light shone from his eyes. He moved his hand, and his sword shot out. The fleeting divine sword cut out once again. At that moment, The sword arced across the sky like a rainbow. The sword that his opponent had sent against him could not withstand the current of sword will, and began to move backward. The terrifying fleeting divine sword raged between heaven and earth, destroying everything. The two swords collided, divine sword light bloomed, and everything around them was turned into dust that flew in all directions. The wave of chi that this kicked up made everybody raise their hands to block it. The guqin still played, the music growing wilder and wilder. The terrible rhythmic sorcery was powerful enough to change the very positions of the stars. Wan Shui himself seemed to be immersed within that will. His sword was in accord with the guqin music, and after the destruction caused by the first collision, he struck out again. This guqin music. Everyone was watching Yi Futian. The music caused substantial changes to occur in Wan Shui's sword. One of the cultivators of the divine swordly family was staring at Yi Futian. He waved his hand, and a line of divine swords appeared in the sky. They shot through the air as one, heading straight for Yi Futian. Luoyue was standing in front of Yi Futian. She calmed her mind, and could feel the guqin music working in tandem with her sword. She thrust it out, forming a terrible storm that destroyed all the swords rushing towards her. At that moment Wan Shui rose up. He waved his sword many times, making clouds flow around it like water as it cut through the air. Crack! An ear-splitting noise rang out as Li Sun's sword was shattered. His sleeves were torn by sword qi, and scratches appeared on his arms. Blood stained his robe, and terrible sword will raged within his body. He looked at Wan Shui, and then at Yi Futian up in the air. The guqin music had melded with the sword. Could it really have transformed so much? Previously, Wan Shui had been no match for him at all. Wan Shui did not continue his attack. He looked up at Li Sun. Li Sun looked back at him and said, Lord Taixian is truly impressive in that he has been able to simultaneously cultivate swordsmanship and music, and meld them together perfectly. I have been defeated by you too, so the fruit is yours. On saying this, he left with the rest of the cultivators of the divine swordly family. His defeat was different than Wan Shui's. He had lost to two people working together, and so this was not a loss of face for the divine swordly family. Before, he had been absolutely crushing Wan Shui. As he watched Li Sun leave, Wan Shui felt conflicted. In reality he had lost. But he never would have imagined that this music could be so marvelous, and work together with his swordsmanship so well. He looked back at Yi Futian with a smile. He had already sensed that this Shen Jing was special, but he was still shocked. The fruit. Little Phoenix flashed over towards the fruit, but found a burst of invisible sword will blocking her way. It was the sword will that was emitting from the tree. A figure appeared before Little Phoenix, and looked at everyone. There are 5 pieces of fruit. How will you divide them? There were 15 people there from Taixian Mountain. Little Phoenix looked at him. Divide them? Those 2 were the ones who won this fruit. It should go to them. If they were going to be shared, then Wan Shui and Yi Futian would be the ones to share them. Junmu raised his eyebrows. This fruit could be used to prove one's worthiness. Even if it was not useful for you specifically, you could trade it with someone for their fruit. It was extremely precious, and they had all fought for it. How could they give it up? Wan Shui and Shen Jing defeated Li Sun, but the rest of us blocked the other cultivators of the divine swordly family. Otherwise, Wan Shui would have been defeated earlier. Wan Shui and Shen Jing should each get 1 piece, and we will guard the other 3 for the time being. We can divide them up when this is all over, said Junmu. If Yi Futian had not reversed the situation, he would not have been able to get even a single piece of fruit. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian stared at Junmu. He and Wan Shui would each get 1 piece of fruit, and Junmu would watch over the other 3 pieces? Yi Futian stared at Junmu. He and Wan Shui would each get 1 piece of fruit, and Junmu would watch over the other 3 pieces? It seemed that Junmu was leaning on his position as a disciple of Taixian Mountain. He was indeed at the head of the other disciples of Taixian Mountain. He wanted to divide the fruit up according to his own desires, and even take a piece for himself. However, when one had cultivated up to their level, there were countless other people in the higher heavens realm who were fighting for this very chance that they had now. They wanted to break out from the crowd of ordinary disciples and have a chance to take part in this event. They would face a lot of challenges just to have this opportunity. Even though they had such a slim chance, countless people still came here. This showed just how much the people of the higher heavens realm valued the fruit. Was Junmu worthy of taking charge of and dividing up something so precious? However, perhaps it was the very preciousness of the fruit that had conjured feelings of greed within him. What did friendship between fellow disciples even count for anyway? Moreover, Junmu had never looked favorably upon Futian ever since the day that he had come to the mountain, probably because of the relationship with his master. Why would you be the one to guard them? Little Phoenix stared at Junmu in surprise. Before Shinjing got here, you had already counseled Wan Shuyi to give up the fight. That is equivalent to giving up your right to the fruit. Then Shinjing came and strengthened Wan Shuyi's swordsmanship. This is why they are able to have the fruit in the first place. Now you want to seize the fruits of their labors? Feng Yan, our master has given you a place on this quota, so your conduct will reflect upon the two demon emperors. Taishan Mountain has been so good to you, and yet you still plot against them? You should know your place, said Junmu coldly. As he spoke, he was already walking towards the tree. He was going to pick the fruit. Whoosh! A beam of sword chi whistled down from the sky, shooting straight towards the tree. Junmu frowned as he reached up to slap it away, destroying it. He looked back at the one who had done this. It was Wan Shuyi. What is the meaning of this, Brother Wan? Do you think that you should be the only one to have the fruit? Junmu's face turned ugly. Although there were many pieces of the precious fruit, they were difficult to obtain. The most powerful people had already fought their way through and seized many of them, and many other cultivators had seized more of them. It would be very difficult for the 15 cultivators from Taishan Mountain to get 15 pieces of the fruit. Given that Taishan Mountain had managed to obtain 5 pieces of fruit, how could they let them all go? Would he not get even a single piece of fruit? He was at the nirvana level. It was not easy to cultivate up to that level, and to break through to the Ranhuang level was even more difficult. Who of the people who had made it to his level would not want to forge a Ranhuang body, activate the wheel of the great path, and shine with the sun and the moon? Read more chapter on novel full. When he took this step, he would have the right to pursue a higher level. Before he did so, even though he was a genius, he would forever be far away from the next level. Brother Jun, Feng Yan is correct. We had lost the fruit, but then Shinjing used his Guqin music to transform my swordsmanship into something much more powerful. Otherwise, Li Sun of the Divine Swordly family would have defeated me. Thus, Shinjing is the one who has the right to divide up the fruit. Even I don't have the right to ask for a piece. Wan Shuyi said politely to Junmu. He seemed very courteous, but he was firmly stating his position. It was not that he favored Shinjing. This was just the right thing to do. Even if Futian did not give him any of the fruit, he would not say anything. After all, without Futian he would have lost, and may even have been crippled by Li Sun. When a battle broke out while seeking the way, even if he was killed or wounded, his elders could not seek revenge. It would have been his own choice that had led him down that path. I think that what Brother Wan said makes sense. It is for Shinjing to divide up the fruit, said Luoyue, looking at Futian as she spoke. This made Junmu hesitate as he walked towards the tree. He could not force his way through to pick the fruit. Given the current situation, if he picked the fruit, it would probably cause infighting between them. Lord Taishan broke through to the next level, and thus Taishan Mountain was allotted 15 people to come here. I never thought that a single tree would cause a situation like this to happen. If we go on like this, how can we be of one mind going forward? Asked Junmu coldly. So if you divide up the fruit, we will be of one mind, but if Shinjing does it, we won't. Feng Yan looked at Junmu angrily. He was clearly just like all the others. He wanted to seize the fruit. But this was normal after all. Everyone was greedy. I am a disciple of the Taishan Hierophant. Who is Shinjing? Even though Fourth Miss brought him to the mountain, he is still just a musician who has received many favors from Taishan Mountain, which is why he was able to cultivate this famous song. He may have been successful in forcing the people from the Divine Swordly family to retreat, but that was due to an ability that Taishan Mountain gave him. Even the fact that he was on the quota was thanks to Taishan Mountain. So who do you think should divide up the fruit? Junmu's words were harsh. He wanted to differentiate him from the rest of Taishan Mountain and make him lose heart. After all, what he was saying was true. Yi Futian was only a musician on Taishan Mountain and did not have the status of a disciple. And Junmu was the personal disciple of the Taishan Hierophant, making him a sort of grand disciple of Lord Taishan. A look of surprise came over the faces of the other disciples of Taishan Mountain. They had not thought that there would be any infighting. But given the current situation, there was not one among them who did not want a piece of the fruit. After all, they were not a family like the Divine Swordly family. They did not have a definite leader like they did. They had all vaguely considered Junmu to be their de facto leader, since he was the disciple of the Taishan Hierophant. But Junmu was not powerful enough to defeat them all. If he had been able to defeat Li Sun, then he would have been mighty indeed. But now it seemed like he had not been mighty enough, which is why they were facing this current dilemma. In this way, it would be difficult for them to get any more fruit. Moreover, spending time here debating was a waste of time in and of itself. Some of them looked at Yi Futian. Hopefully, he would take the imitative and make a concession. There are 5 pieces of fruit, and I will give up 2 of them. One of them will go to Wan Shui, who fought in this battle, and the other one to Luoyue. The other ones will stay with me, said Yi Futian. He stepped forward as he said this. Standing here talking nonsense was indeed wasting the time that still remained to him to strive for other pieces of the fruit. Junmu stared at Yi Futian. He was indeed greedy. Other than the 2 people he had said, Wan Shui and Luoyue, he would be the only one to get the fruit. He looked at the others. This is someone who came to Taishan Mountain to seek the way. What do you think of this, brothers? You are being unreasonable, Brother Shenjing, said Ma Yi. He had been made a part of the quota by the house master of Taishan. He had always been curious about Yi Futian, but then he had entered String Palace to cultivate. He was thinking that this musician, who had been brought to Taishan Mountain, was not showing enough gratitude for what his master had done. Moreover, he seemed very close to Luoyue. This changed Ma Yi's attitude towards him. Since we have all agreed to divide it up like this, go and receive your share, brothers. Trying to work together has led us to this situation. It is ridiculous, said Junmu mockingly. I regret that it came to this as well, but I will stand by what I said. If someone comes to take the fruit, Wan Shui raised his sword. After we return, I will beg for forgiveness from Lord Taishan. It was clear that if someone tried to pick the fruit, he would cut them down. Yi Futian stood behind Wan Shui. He was still holding his guqin. Thinking of how powerful the 2 of them had been when they worked together, Junmu's face suddenly turned ugly. Li Sun had been defeated by the 2 of them. He knew he was not as strong as Li Sun, so if he fought them, he would not only probably not get the fruit, but he would be hurt as well, which would make it harder to fight for more of the fruit in the future. Good for you, said Junmu with a wave of his sleeve. He stepped forward and said, You can see for yourselves what they are like. Those who want to can come with me. The other disciples of the Taishan Hierophant naturally followed close behind him. Ma Yi followed as well, and then a few more people. After all, Junmu was very strong. Shenjing picked the fruit, said Wan Shui to Yi Futian. Yi Futian nodded. He picked the 5 pieces of fruit. He gave 1 each to Wan Shui and Luoyue, then ate 1 piece himself. This left 2 more. What about mine? Feng Yin gave him a pitiful look. You want one too? Yi Futian looked at her disdainfully. This girl asked too much. You're so mean. Little Phoenix snorted. Yi Futian looked at the other people who had stayed and said, I will not guarantee that any of you will get any fruit. If you seize it for yourself, then you are naturally entitled to it. But if I get it, then only after I have taken a certain number will I share it. Taishan Mountain had been good to him, but he could not share all the fruit with the disciples of Taishan Mountain. After all, he was not all that friendly with any of them. Other than Wan Shui, who he was on relatively good terms with, the others were all casual acquaintances at best. Should he treat them as old friends and share the precious fruit with them based on such a casual relationship? Then what about Yu Sheng, Wuchen and Yaya? So he would not promise anything, nor would he be stingy. He had left 2 pieces of the 5 that he had taken. A look of surprise came over several people's faces when they heard what he said. He may have said that he would be the one to divide up these 5 pieces, but what he was saying now was even more arrogant. It seemed that he would be deciding everything from now on. The people who had been part of the quota were no ordinary cultivators. They did not look at Yi Futian as their leader. He had learned the famous songs in the String Palace on Taishan Mountain, and yet it seemed as if he regarded them as nothing. As he watched them leave, Yi Futian knew that he had offended them, but it was better to speak the ugly truth now to avoid a situation like what had just happened than to have them be bitter at him later. There were only 5 people left now: Yi Futian, Little Phoenix, Wan Shuyi, Luoyue, and Deng Hu, who had come with Luoyue. He was a subordinate of the city lord of Taishan. "Let's go," said Yi Futian and began to leave. Wan Shuyi watched him. Ever since Yi Futian had been in his mind, he had seemed different than before. His modest demeanor had gradually disappeared, and now there was an overpowering will about him. Perhaps his true self was finally showing. His figure flashed, and Wan Shuyi was soon riding on his sword. "When you played your music, I could feel the true will of swordsmanship. It seemed like the true final strike of the fleeting divine sword," he said. "The music comes from the same root as the fleeting divine sword," answered Yi Futian. "But I could only feel the will. It is difficult to use the true fleeting divine sword." Wan Shuyi seemed regretful. "Otherwise, when I create my divine wheel of swordsmanship, every time I strike, it will be with a fleeting divine sword." The divine wheel of the great path could directly connect heaven and earth. All of the divine great wheels that cultivators created were different from one another. They had different strengths and weaknesses, and they even had different numbers of them. Wan Shuyi's entire mind was set upon seeking the way of swordsmanship. He naturally wanted nothing more than to create a giant divine wheel of swordsmanship. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian and the others continued forward, but after several battles, most of the fruit had already been picked off the trees and taken away. They came upon places where people were fighting, but there was no fruit left on the trees. Yi Futian and the others continued forward, but after several battles, most of the fruit had already been picked off the trees and taken away. They came upon places where people were fighting, but there was no fruit left on the trees. This was an opportunity for everyone to prove their worthiness, to advance to the next level and fight for the right to move forward along the great path. If they had to fight for it, then they would all do so. No one was worried about being polite, or about differences in rank. Yi Futian and the others managed to win another piece of fruit, after which they discovered that there were no more anywhere around them. But everyone was heading towards the tallest mountain. There seemed to be a celestial palace at the top of that ancient peak. It seemed illusory, but everyone could faintly sense the majestic spirits of the heavens and the earth, and the will of the great path there. The mountain seemed to be wrapped in will. Everyone was moving towards there as they fought. As they got closer, more and more battles were breaking out at the foot of the mountain. The will was so thick that many gods had been born here. When Yi Futian and the others arrived, they could feel an astonishing pressure, both solemn and divine. The whole mountain was covered thickly in will. It was like they were walking through a fog that slightly blurred their vision. Boom! The sound of thunder came to them, and lightning was falling from the sky somewhere else in the fog, making the whole area tremble. But the mountain was incredibly sturdy. It stood there, unmoved and full of divine majesty. When Yi Futian arrived, he saw several people off to the side, recovering from their wounds. There was a tree there that had endless divine lightning wrapping around it. There was only one piece of fruit on the tree, but it was bigger than the ones he had seen before. It was bathed in the divine lightning of the great path, and thunder was booming in the sky above it. Every time the thunder boomed, the fruit became a bit riper, and the will grew thicker and stronger. It is baptized in thunder, just like the catastrophe of the great path. Yi Futian's heart trembled. This was truly a wonder of the world. This piece of fruit surely contained even more of the will of the great path than the others. There was only one piece of fruit on this tree, but he did not know if there had always just been one, or if the others had been taken by other people. Given the situation that they were seeing before them, it was very likely that there had always just been one piece of fruit. All of the will of the great path had been sucked up by that singular piece of fruit. The piece of fruit was wrapped in curling lightning and rolling thunder, making it look like a bright and clear spirit orb. Beside it was a giant divine thunder dragon. It was wrapped around the tree, seemingly waiting for the fruit to ripen even more. It seemed that it would eat the fruit once it had become as ripe as possible. In this way, it would be of the most use to him, allowing him to break through to the level of a demon emperor. There was a purple-robed old man before him with purple eyes. Endless lightning was shooting out of his eyes, and brilliant divine thunderbolts traveled over his robes. A millstone-shaped thundercloud appeared in the sky. It roared and roiled constantly, resonating with the old man's body. "He has a spirit of the great path," whispered Wuxia, an imposing look on his face. The dragon was a great demon cultivator, with a huge form and brilliant lightning traveling through its every scale. It seemed as if he had cultivated his thunder body as much as possible. The old man had taken an extremely important step towards becoming a Renhuang, and it could be said that he was already only a half a step away from that plane. If he could carve a wheel of the great path here, and use the fruit to activate his Renhuang body, then he would be able to prove himself worthy of becoming a Renhuang. Futian could also feel how deep this old man's power was. He seemed to even be a step further along the path than his teacher had been when he came out of Emperor Li's palace. Thus, as far as he was concerned, this opportunity was extremely important. He needed this piece of fruit more than anything. "You should all go somewhere else." The old man naturally sensed Futian and the others coming. He swept his gaze over them, and in an instant, the lightning of the great path was piercing through Futian's eyes. It pressed down on his spiritual will. He was obviously trying to make him realize how difficult this would be, and thus retreat. There was no misunderstanding that. Read more chapter on novel full. You are at such a high level. You will soon be an emperor. Why don't you give that piece of fruit to those of us who are at a much lower level? Said Futian with a grin. Beside him, little Phoenix snorted. But she had already grown used to Futian's shamelessness. Boom! The old man pointed up into the sky, and suddenly, the millstone-shaped cloud flashed with lightning. It was filled with the mighty power of thunder. The figure of a god of thunder appeared up in the sky, huge and powerful. It pressed its palm down towards the ground. All of this happened without the old man saying a word. Because he was only a half step away from the Renhuang plain, he needed the fruit more than them. This was especially true because this fruit was of particular use to him. It would very likely bring him even closer to the Renhuang plain. Anyone who dared block his path would have to die. Wuxia pointed his sword into the air. It cut through the sky, and he rose along with it. The sword cut into the thundering palm, and lightning covered his body. But at the same time, the giant palm was shattered. Futian looked up into the air. He flicked his sleeves and sat down cross-legged. The guqin rang out once again. This old man was truly fierce. He had not shown them the least bit of politeness. The guqin music suddenly became loud and sonorous. Wuxia entered the state that he had been in before. When the music entered his ears, it resonated with his sword will. The endless will of heaven and earth entered into his sword. When he felt the power of this will, a look of surprise flashed in the old man's eyes. He turned towards Wuxia and stretched out his hands as thunder will covered him. Suddenly, the will of heaven and earth grew even stronger than before. The entire great path of thunder was under his control. Futian looked up into the sky. He realized that a Renhuang with the spirit of the great path was frighteningly powerful. But their opponent was not quite strong enough. Otherwise, he would be able to wield shocking power like his teacher had at the battle at Brahma's Sky City. He had stretched out his Renhuang will, truly pushing himself to the limit. Not long after that battle, his teacher had entered the Renhuang plain. He saw the old man's finger point downwards. The divine thunder of the great path split the sky, and thunderbolts that looked like dragons shot towards both Wuxia and Futian. Luoyue moved. The guqin music resonated with her as well. Her sword moved, forming a barrier of all things above Yi Futian. She did not protect Wan Shuyi. He was already at the nirvana level, and with the resonance of the Guqin music, his power had transformed. He did not fear his opponent's attack. "If you continue to just watch, Elder Dragon, we will have to withdraw," said Yi Futian to the demon dragon as he continued playing the Guqin. Was he waiting there to collect the spoils of victory, without lifting a finger to help? The demon dragon looked at Yi Futian. The old man had indeed threatened him, but as long as he was protecting the fruit, he was not afraid. If the situation changed at all, he would just eat the fruit. He was already protecting the fruit. It was already basically his. Why would he participate in the battle? Yi Futian's words were simply ridiculous. He was waiting for the fruit to ripen. Once it had become as ripe as possible, he would eat it. All he needed for this was the fruit itself. When he saw that the dragon did not move, Yi Futian complained to himself that the people here were too savvy. It looked like they would have to rely on their strength instead. The Guqin music grew more and more steady, until it was as regular as the passing of the seasons. Wan Shuyi slashed out with his sword again and again. He had already forced the old man to come out and fight in person. While fighting, he could still feel the pressure from the Guqin music. The music seemed to be leading the sword will to attack his spirit. His spirit may have been so strong that it could not be damaged, but it still made him very uncomfortable. The battlefield grew wilder and wilder. The old man was still as sturdy as a mountain, and Wan Shuyi's sword was getting stronger and stronger. But he still could not hurt the old man at all. At the same time, the endless notes floating through the air merged with the sword, becoming a river that flowed between heaven and earth. The old man could faintly sense that something was not right, but he had no way of knowing precisely what it was. He seemed to have a faint sense of something threatening him. Crack! A sharp sound rang out as Wan Shuyi cut at him. The old man transformed into a thunder body, and his spirit materialized, becoming real. He slammed his fist into the sword, and suddenly there was a terrifying burst of energy. "That is the sword of Taishan Mountain, but you are not skilled enough to wield it." The old man's hair flew in the wind. Lightning shot out from his eyes towards his opponent. But as the two of them collided, the notes from Yi Futian's Guqin were flowing through the air like a river of swordsmanship. They enveloped the old man. He looked up and suddenly felt a serious threat. This isn't good. He slammed his hand down fiercely, trying to break free of his entanglement with Wan Shuyi. At the same time, terrifying thunder magic burst forth from his body, forming a thunder curtain around him. But at that moment, the flowing river of swords suddenly turned into killing swords. They pierced through the sky, leaving sword marks in the air. They crisscrossed and overlapped, until everything in the space where the old man was coiled up in destructive swords. No! The old man's expression changed. Countless sword slashes suddenly appeared on him. He seemed to have been cut by thousands of swords. A look of fear came over his face. Wan Shuyi thrust his sword forward, cutting right through the body that his opponent had formed with his spirit. In a flash, the old man's body became illusory. He looked down in pain on the scene below him, with a fierce sense of displeasure. He was so close to the Runhuang level. How could he fall like this? Boom! The old man's body shattered into nothingness. Wan Shuyi withdrew his sword. He looked up in surprise at what was happening above him. And not only him, Luoyue and the others' hearts were pounding. That was not Wan Shuyi's sword. The Guqin music had activated this final sword. It had used the cleave of all things, the perfected cleave of all things. This was just like what had happened on Taishan Mountain. It seemed that the sword of Taishan Mountain looked upon them with favor. 15 people from Taishan Mountain were part of the quota. They all believed that Lord Taishan would not lie to them. The mystery cultivator must be someone on the divine path. So why was he not among them? Why had Lord Taishan reserved 2 places on the quota? Now they all knew why. He was there. Wan Shuyi drew back his sword and lowered his head. There was an unmistakable look of shock in his deep eyes, as he looked at the elegant and handsome young man. Wan Shuyi drew back his sword and lowered his head. There was an unmistakable look of shock in his deep eyes, as he looked at the elegant and handsome young man. He thought of the brief time that Yi Futian had been cultivating at Taishan Mountain. He had entered String Palace to cultivate the Guqin arts, and had gone to Sword Abyss to study the sword. He had been quiet and unassuming, modest and restrained. He had not fought with anyone. Who would have thought that this man, who had been cultivating so quietly at Taishan Mountain, the one whom everyone thought was just a lucky young man, was actually someone who had learned the famous songs of String Palace, and had completed the second strike of the fleeting divine sword, the cleave of all things. He had defeated the genius cultivators of the divine capital of Xiling, using only his own power. He was such a powerful person, and yet the people of Taishan Mountain had not sensed the smallest bit of pride in him. He was so restrained. Indeed, he had only been cultivating at Taishan Mountain for a few short months. Luoyue felt the same way, and her heart was in turmoil. When she thought of how they had constantly exhorted Shenjing to study hard, her face turned red. It seemed that the one who had helped her discharge so much swordsmanship back then was Shenjing. So when she and brother Wan Shui had been fighting, Shenjing had played the guqin. The guqin music had helped stimulate her swordsmanship, and it was not just luck that this had happened. Shenjing had purposely played the guqin to help her. She felt a little bit gloomy. She should have realized that as soon as Yi Futian played his masterpiece. "Was it you who helped me break through to the next level back then?" she whispered to Yi Futian. Yi Futian looked at her and smiled. "No need to worry about it, Princess Luoyue. You were only a step away from the next level. Even without my music, you would still have been able to do that soon. Why did you choose to assist me with my swordsmanship?" Luoyue asked. Her tone and attitude were completely different than they had been before. She was feeling conflicted. "Because me coming into contact with you back in Taishan City turned out to be very lucky," said Yi Futian with a smile. Luoyue was stunned. Then she seemed to realize something. She looked at Yi Futian, as if she was in a trance. It seemed that he was the mysterious swordsman as well. She smiled sweetly and said, "Thank you." Yi Futian smiled again, but said no more on the subject. He looked in another direction and said, "We should take care of this matter." At that moment, the demon dragon was still on guard. His massive body was hovering there, and he stared at Yi Futian. He seemed very vigilant. These people had actually killed the old man. The old man had been powerful enough to threaten him. It seemed like if it came to a fight, he would not be able to withstand these human cultivators. "There is no way you will get this fruit. You are strong enough to go and seize fruit from somewhere else. Why waste your time here?" The dragon's voice rolled like thunder. If they attacked him in force, and he could not withstand them, he would just eat the fruit right away. "If you eat the fruit, then we will have no choice but to feast on dragon flesh and drink dragon blood," said Yi Futian with a smile. When he heard what Yi Futian had said, the dragon's expression grew dark. Terrible lightning flashed in his eyes as he stared fixedly at Yi Futian. This human was completely shameless. A low roar erupted from his mouth. Divine lightning flashed, and a fierce light shone in his eyes. Yi Futian stepped forward, still holding his guqin. Wan Shui, Luoyue, and the others followed him, subconsciously accepting him as their leader. They now understood Lord Taishuan's wishes. Yi Futian was their greatest safeguard here. It was unfortunate, then, that when Yi Futian had helped them defeat Li Sun and seize the fruit, Junmu had gotten greedy. Given the strength and talent that he had shown, then even without them, Yi Futian could have defeated Li Sun by himself and taken the fruit. Why would he have given any of the fruit to Junmu? He had tried to steal it. Giving them 2 pieces of fruit was already exceedingly kind. Junmu doing this had made it so that they had needed to part ways. Otherwise, the other people from Taishan Mountain would have been able to see what had just happened. Yi Futian's eyes became incredibly frightening. They seemed endlessly deep, like 2 black holes as he stared at the dragon. The dragon suddenly became irritable, and a series of low roars came from him. He could feel his spiritual well-being infected. Terrible lightning shot out of his eyes towards Yi Futian's, but he could sense a spiritual storm swallowing him. Roar! The dragon gave an earth-shaking roar that thundered through the air. Thousands of bolts of divine lightning fell from the sky. Yi Futian stared at him as he was bathed in endless thunder, saying, "I will only ask you this one more time. Will you withdraw?" The dragon roared as he heard the unmistakable threat in Yi Futian's voice. He became incredibly violent, but he could feel that there was actual danger here. It seemed like the human before him actually held his life in his hands. If he tried to fight or ate the fruit, things would go very badly for him afterward. In the end, he could not withstand the pressure that Yi Futian was putting on him. He gave another earth-shaking roar that made the air itself tremble. He rose up and flew towards the mountains, leaving the fruit behind. Yi Futian walked up to the tree. Beside him, Wuxia said, "This fruit bears the will of the great path of thunder, and it is still growing. The will within it gets stronger by the moment." Yi Futian nodded. His figure slashed as he rushed towards the tree and picked the fruit. Although it was not completely grown yet, he did not have time to wait. Before, the demon dragon and the old man's struggle had happened because they were both placing all of their hopes upon this one piece of fruit. But Yi Futian was different. This piece of fruit was not his only target. It would be far from enough to sate his ambition. Crunch! A clear sound rang out. Little Phoenix and the others watched in shock as Yi Futian bit into the giant piece of fruit. He was eating it right there on the spot. Wuxia and Luoyue looked at Yi Futian. This was not happening like they had imagined. Little bolts of lightning were flashing from Yi Futian's mouth. This piece of fruit was even bigger than the ones before, but it seemed that Yi Futian would finish it in no time. Lightning flashed all over Yi Futian's body for a time, and within him, a world of lightning formed. The terrible lightning seemed like it would never dissipate. It ran through him, turning his life spirit, the world tree, into a tree of lightning. All of his internal organs and bones were filled with the power of lightning. Boom! Yi Futian took a step forward, and a thunderous boom erupted off of him. "Let's keep moving forward," he said. He felt that his level became more secure. If he could get a few dozen or a few hundred pieces of fruit and eat them slowly, he would eventually be able to break through to the next level. If the cultivators of the Divine Palace knew he wanted to do this, they would probably try to kill him. Each piece of fruit here was very precious. Even if they managed to get a piece of it, most people would save it until they had cultivated up to the peak of their level. He was thinking of breaking through to the next level solely by eating the fruit. Moreover, the fruit contained will within it. It would naturally remain undigested for a while. The five of them continued forward. Now that they had witnessed Yi Futian's strength, they knew that he was the one who had used the sword of Taishan Mountain. Thus, they had a lot of confidence in him. He would probably bring a lot of benefits to them in the future. Luoyue looked off into the distance. "What is that over there? It has such a strong life aura." Ahead of them was a place filled with a mystical fog. It was as if a life aura had spread out between heaven and earth. Yi Futian looked over there and could faintly see a towering tree there. The mystical fog was all around the tree, and it seemed like it was actually a life aura. "Let's go take a look." The group sped up. As they got closer, they could see an incomparably giant tree. All of the fruit had already been picked, and what was more frightening was that there was a stream under all the fog. It was the stream of the birth of the way. Yi Futian's heart trembled. This was a legendary place. The water of this stream was the legendary water of life. Every drop had the power to save lives, and could even bring life back to dead bones. At that moment, some people were bathing in the stream, but it was not truly for the purpose of washing, but rather to absorb the life will. Life will was not just useful for saving your life. People who cultivated the way of life were incredibly vigorous. People with a strong life aura were physically very strong and were very difficult to kill. The people who were bathing in the stream saw Yi Futian and the others as well. They looked up sharply at the newcomers. Their eyes were cold, but also very beautiful. All of them were women. One of the people bathing in the stream was as beautiful as a life goddess with her exquisite features. These were all disciples of the Divine Palace, and were all incredible beauties. "This is a good place." Yi Futian could not help but marvel. As he said this, their gazes grew even colder. They discharged their auras, and they all fell upon Yi Futian. "Have you seen enough?" came a cold voice. "If you don't mind, could you make some room for me?" Yi Futian walked forward. It seemed like he wanted to enter the stream. "Get out of here." roared the cold voice. Several of the women's expressions changed. They stared at Futian. Futian glanced around, then said, "Don't worry. The stream is so big. I am sure there is room for a few more people." He continued forward as he said this, and stepped directly into the water. How could he pass by such a wonderful place without experiencing it? It could both nourish his world tree life spirit and strengthen his body. Indeed, the instant he stepped into the water, he could feel his soul become incredibly light. It seemed as if his very organs were relaxing. It was such a wonderful feeling. The power of life was, after all, the power of all things in the world. Little Phoenix and the others all watched Futian with mouths wide open. He was just going to go in the water? Although the others were not truly bathing, they still presented a lovely scene. And he was actually. Wuxia blinked. He felt the image he had conjured up in his mind collapse a little bit. Would he really be so shameless? Luoyue reddened as she beheld this scene. This was going very differently from how she had imagined. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. When those women saw that Futian had gone into the spring, violent, murderous intent swept out. Suddenly, the entire spring was shrouded by a strong will of the way. It was as if it was an endless pure white silver lightning walking about in the spring, and swam toward Futian. When those women saw that Futian had gone into the spring, violent, murderous intent swept out. Suddenly, the entire spring was shrouded by a strong will of the way. It was as if it was an endless pure white silver lightning walking about in the spring, and swam toward Futian. Boom! An extremely majestic breath erupted from Futian's body, which turned into a radiant golden body, and a savage power swept out along with sharp and piercing sounds. Futian stood there, his body immense like a god, difficult to shake. "Get out!" That most beautiful woman, whose eyes were extremely cold, was staring at Futian. "The divine spring of the great path, where all goddesses bathe in it. Why do I have to get out?" Futian spoke lightly. The power of the fountain of life instantly entered his body. It flowed across his 4 limbs and the torso. The ancient tree of the world turned into a divine tree, swaying inside the life palace, absorbing the will of the divine spring. This spring water contained a richness of life that far exceeded that of the previous fruit of the way. If it could be completely refined and absorbed into the body, how vibrant would his chances of life be? Perhaps even the physical body would be difficult to destroy. When his thoughts turned to this, the ancient trees of the world absorbed this power frantically. In an instant, his body seemed to have turned into a terrible vortex, causing the spring water to rush into his body madly. In an instant, Futian was overwhelmed by the richness of the breath of life. The women in the divine spring looked bewildered. What was going on? They bathed in the divine spring, gradually digesting and absorbing the will of the way contained within. After this man had stepped into the divine spring, his body seemed to have turned into a vortex. It was trying to devour the entire spring. Wuxia and the others, likewise, were equally puzzled. This guy, he intended to swallow up the entire divine spring? Stop him! The woman who was in the lead scolded. Suddenly, all the women in the divine spring moved toward Futian. In an instant, many methods bloomed at the same time and rolled toward Futian. Futian's entire body seemed to be cast in gold, and their immense amounts of thunder and lightning swept out. The breath inside his body was magnificent and extremely dominant. Although he was only in the realm of unblemished saint, under that majestic momentum, it was definitely at the breath of nirvana level. When Wuxia and Luoyue saw this, their hearts were trembling. Just how strong was this guy? Previously, they had seen Futian swallow the fruit of the way when he had gotten it. Futian was indeed an expert at these kinds of abilities. It seemed that he was good at more than just music and swordsmanship. However, although he exhibited many abilities, Futian's attack at this time was still in the realm of swordsmanship. As Sheng Jing, his disguise was a musician swordsman, so these 2 abilities played a major role, while all the others were only ancillary. Seeing these many attacks coming toward him, Futian pointed his finger forward. and a terrifying vortex storm of swordsmanship appeared in front of him, wrapping all the incoming attacks inside. Even more terrifying was that the sword will of cleave of all things also contained the power to attack divine souls. Bodies were flying out, and many of the goddesses were injured. Some made muffled groans while others' clothing was stained with their own blood. Futian didn't seem to harbor any tenderness for the ladies. Goddesses, the way was hidden within this divine spring. It is meant as an opportunity to prove the way, and can be used by anyone. If the goddesses act so insolent as to prevent others from using it, then don't blame me for being merciless, Futian said as he stepped forward. The sword will was murderous as it shrouded the divine spring. What was even more terrifying was that the spring water in the divine spring was continuously decreasing and was still being swallowed madly by Futian. His body was like a bottomless hole, draining the divine spring. The divine tree nourished the life water of this spring, and it was impossible to move it. It could only absorb its will of the way. But Futian, did he want to swallow it completely, or move the divine spring into his body completely? Moreover, was he cultivating the path of devouring? There did not seem to be any the sensation of the breath of devouring the great path. So how did he do it? The woman in the lead saw that Futian was so overbearing in his stance. With a cold countenance, she released her breath and stepped forward, saying, "You should also know that this place is run by the divine palace. So this place, by right, belongs to the disciples of the divine palace. This proving ground originally belonged to the divine palace, but it gave the outsiders the opportunity to cultivate, so that made them eligible to compete for it. Many disciples of the divine palace were unhappy about this, but there was nothing they could do. Except for a few top characters, others could only come and compete with the geniuses from the outside. According to the elders of the divine palace, this was also a powerful trial for the disciples of the divine palace. The woman's name was Lu Qingyao. She was a direct disciple of a prominent figure of the divine palace. She was walking in the divine spring, and as her body emerged from the divine spring, her silvery white dress was spotless. An extremely majestic might now rolled through the world. In an instant, this world turned into a world of frost. Everything was about to be frozen. Luoyua shuddered. She glanced down at her hands and body. There was a snowy white frost invading her body, and the sword will in the surrounding space was also solidified, seemingly frozen. Her ability to sense the outside world was reduced yet again. It was as if she had entered an independent space. Likewise, Futian also felt that his blood flow slowed down as the icy cold will of the way now invaded his body, affecting his senses. He felt that he was no longer in the spring, but was now in a frozen world. His perception of the outside world had also slowed. What a powerful technique. It affects the perception of the others and leads one into a space of illusion, Futian secretly remarked. At their level of cultivation, everyone's strength was unfathomably strong. Any kind of carelessness was a matter of life and death. Once the sense of perception was limited, the result would be devastating. On the outside, Lu Qingyao looked coldly ahead, and her eyes seemed to turn white like snow. Her long skirt fluttered as she moved forward. The world was filled with flying frost. The vast and endless space turned a snowy white, and everything was becoming slower. It was the same with Futian's body. Gradually, the hoarfrost would cover everything, and its will of the way would continue to invade Futian's body until he lost all consciousness. But at this moment, she seemed to feel something suddenly. Her brows were knitted together slightly. She looked up at the void as if she felt an invisible will of the way flowing between heaven and earth, traversing that violent, icy will of the way. Boom! With a loud bang, the world of ice seemed to collapse and shatter. Countless sword will suddenly exploded, tearing the nothingness apart. The look on her face changed slightly, as if she looked down at Futian. She saw a pair of terrible sword eyes. It was as if many sharp swords had penetrated her eyes, rushing into her sight, and passed through the world of hoarfrost, piercing the sword spirit in the depth of the world. In her pupils, Futian's shadow seemed to be getting closer and closer. She saw the other pointing in the air with his finger, and that finger was like a sword. The moment it struck, time seemed to stand still once again. Ahem! A muffled groan was heard. In the world of white snow, blood trailed down Lu Qingyao's mouth, dripping onto her white skirt. An extremely strong life spirit wrapped around her body, repairing her injury with incredible speed. Watching the scene, the Divine Palace's disciples came to Lu Qingyao's side in a flash, but Lu Qingyao was still staring at Yi Futian inside the divine spring. Her eyes were very cold. There is still some water in this divine spring. If the goddess would like to bathe together, you would be welcome to do so, Yi Futian said. His body was still devouring the life water in the divine spring, as if he really wanted to move the spring of life that had nurtured this divine tree for many years into his own body. Who are you? Lu Qingyao stared at Yi Futian. A nobody. I am Shenjing, Yi Futian replied. Shenjing. Lu Qingyao indeed had never heard of the name, but now she would remember it. The divine spring was drying up at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. She didn't bother to go down anymore, but stood there, watching the whole thing from there. She did not believe Shenjing was a nobody. Would a nobody be able to break her technique, as she was a direct disciple of the Divine Palace? And the several people behind him all had extraordinary temperament. In addition, the sword technique that he used before was very likely from Taishan Mountain. It didn't take long for the spring of life to dry up completely. It was absorbed by Yi Futian. At this time, Yi Futian was wrapped within a very abundant breath of life. That will of the way was like a cocoon that made Yi Futian feel that the energy of life was incredibly vibrant. It was as if waves of a river were rushing through his body. Yi Futian closed his eyes and felt that this spring of life's will of the way was sufficient to support his cultivation to the realm of Renhuang. Of course, the premise was that he could break through other areas. Now, if he could refine these powers some more, when the moment the deed of thorough comprehension erupted, this vibrant will of the way surging inside his body would not beneath the nirvana plane. By the way, do any of you have some fruit of the way? I have a friend who also cultivates in the will of life, and would like to borrow a couple of fruits of the way. Yi Futian saw that Lu Qingyao and the others from the Divine Palace had not left. After sensing the majestic will of the way inside his body, he thought of Xia Qingyuan. If he didn't save anything for Xia Qingyuan, it would seem unreasonable. Wan Shuyi and Luoyue stared at Yi Futian stunned. This guy had devoured an entire spring of life. Now, he wanted to continue robbing the disciples of the Divine Palace? And that Lu Qingyao had extraordinary strength. They had felt her prowess when she released the will of the way. Judging from her status, she was very likely a direct disciple of the Divine Palace. After Yi Futian swallowed the spring of life, he wanted to rob the fruit of the way for his friends? It was simply too imposing. Even Luoyue found it slightly unbearable. Did he really have no manners around the ladies? If she only knew that Yi Futian was going to rob the beauty of the Divine Palace in front of her for another woman, what would she think? Lu Qingyao's face turned white and then green. The coldness on her body swept around the world. The frost above the sky roared and roiled. As the direct disciple of the Divine Palace, although her beauty could not be said to be unparalleled in this world, it was still remarkable. She had always been a proud daughter of heaven. When had she ever suffered such humiliation? Feeling the chill, Yi Futian whispered under his breath, "If we fight for real, I'm afraid the goddess will not be an adequate opponent. I really don't want to hurt you, shameless." Each of the regular disciples from the Divine Palace, who were next to Lu Qingyao, had a sour look on their faces. They had never seen such a brazen, shameless person. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian didn't care how the others regarded him. A chance like this was not easy to fall upon. He would, of course, try to procure more fruits of the way. This was the fruit that could bring those at the peak of Saint Plane closer to Nirvana Plane, so the more the better. Yi Futian didn't care how the others regarded him. A chance like this was not easy to fall upon. He would, of course, try to procure more fruits of the way. This was the fruit that could bring those at the peak of Saint Plane closer to Nirvana Plane, so the more the better. On this trip, all he saw was everyone competing with one another, plundering goods at every chance. He was no exception. With a chill wrapped around him, Yi Futian saw Lu Qingyao and the others looking at him coldly. His eyes shot out a terrible aura of the sword, and he stepped forward. The invisible sword will flowed between heaven and earth, ready to annihilate, which made the surging will of the way from his body even more majestic. As the disciples of the divine palace felt the sword will that flowed between heaven and earth, their expressions became even more awkward. They realized that Yi Futian would deal with them unkindly, but if they were to hand over the fruits of the way to Yi Futian just like that, where would their dignity be as the disciples of the divine palace? Move, a low voice said, and the tyrannical will of the way erupted again. It seemed that they still wanted to give it another shot. Buzz. At the moment they started, Yi Futian's body turned into a residual shadow, fast to the limit. Before someone could even finish their thought, he had appeared in front of them and unleashed an attack with a single finger. That disciple of the divine palace tried to counterattack, but she was in no shape to bear Yi Futian's sword attack. A bloody trail bloomed in the air as her pupils contracted, but she found that there was only a residual image in front of her, and Yi Futian was no longer there. One after another, the shadows sailed across the void. Soon, Yi Futian returned to where he was before. When his figure finally solidified, that sword will suddenly erupted as all the forces from the attack were destroyed. What was more terrifying was that a terrible storm of sword chi had started inside the space, slashed through by countless sword lights. Poof! One after another, muffled groans were heard. Under his sword, everyone was resisting his sword will. Lu Qingyao stood among the crowd, staring at Yi Futian. She clearly felt that someone was being injured. None of the disciples of the divine palace could bear one of his sword attacks. If the goddess would like to continue, the next strike will be stronger, Yi Futian said. Lu Qingyao's face was gloomy. She stretched out her white palm, and on it, there was a fruit of the way, rich with life. Just one. Yi Futian looked at Lu Qingyao and asked. This divine tree gave birth to a divine spring. There should have been more than just one fruit. Lu Qingyao's face was somber as Yi Futian smiled and said, If I were to search you, it wouldn't be good for you. As she waved her palm, 2 more fruits of the way appeared in her hand. She tossed them toward Yi Futian. Yi Futian caught them without much formality, and put all 3 fruits of the way of life away. Those were for Xia Qingyuan. After Lu Qingyao passed him the fruits, she ignored Yi Futian and turned around to walk away. One could imagine her feelings at that moment. Everyone else glanced at Yi Futian coldly, and then left with Lu Qingyao. Yi Futian didn't pursue them again. 3 fruits of the way was about the right amount. It was quite the harvest. Wan Shuyi and Luoyue seemed a bit numb. Was this the same humble and low-profiled Shenjing they knew at Taishan Mountain? This was too much of a difference. It was as if they were 2 different people. Yi Futian, who stepped into this land of trial, had completely transformed into a predator. Little Phoenix approached at Yi Futian and looked at him with pleading eyes. What are you looking at? Yi Futian said, looking at her. Everyone needs the will of the way of life, Little Phoenix said feebly. He had taken 3 fruits, and he had no plan to give one to the cute little phoenix? Yi Futian ignored her and turned to walk forward. He replied in a low voice, There's not enough. The friend that you are going to give them to, is it a man or a woman? Little Phoenix asked, running after him. A woman, Yi Futian replied. I knew it. Little Phoenix looked at Yi Futian and whispered, I am also your friend. How come you are not giving me some? Was she not pretty enough? Or not cute enough? You. Yi Futian glanced back and saw that Little Phoenix gave him a gentle smile, and there was even some charm to it. She blushed a little bit. Yi Futian looked rather baffled and said, Sorry, we are not friends like that. He turned around, moving forward in great strides. You jerk, Little Phoenix cursed loudly. She could forget about getting that precious fruit of the way. He was so heartless, denying her even one fruit. They continued forward and plundered more along the way. On their way to that immortal Fey palace, they had stolen even more fruits of the way. And Yi Futian had reaped a lot, and had eaten even more fruits of the way. He was feeling a little bit too full. From every other direction, the direction of other cultivators was consistent with his. They were all going toward that immortal Fey palace. Moreover, as he approached, More and more cultivators were also coming. Many of them were geniuses of the top forces, and some were disciples of the divine palace. As Yi Futian and his group walked all the way up the mountain, the divine Fei palace became even clearer. The sky above them and the ancient mountain were filled with the holy power of the divine might of the great path, and it was getting stronger. From all directions of the mountain, people were walking up one after another, and they could all feel a sacred breath. It seemed that there was something holy residing above them. What is that? When Yi Futian saw that in front of the immortal Fei palace at the top, there seemed to be an immense divine tree planted there. What was even more amazing was that this tree had infinite colors, and the color of each giant tree branch was different. They stretched out in different directions, and were extremely beautiful. This tree is so huge. Little Phoenix looked up and murmured. It has all kinds of fruits of the way, all kinds. Wan Shuyi whispered. There were different fruits on the radiant branches of the divine tree. It was as if this tree alone produced many different fruits with different wills of the way. The whole tree was dazzling, and contained boundless and powerful will of the way. Next to the ancient tree, many were standing there. In front of each fruit, there seemed to be at least one or many cultivators guarding it. It was as if they had already laid claim to those fruits of the way. The products have the essence of the sun, the moon, and the sky. Yi Futian looked up. Many had already arrived here, and there seemed to be a dividing line there. Above the mountain it was forbidden. Someone tried to ascend by force, but a divine golden light on the mountain was descending from the sky. It was a long spear of gold that directly pierced the void and nailed the cultivators who tried to trespass. Gai Shir. Yi Futian looked at that figure and saw that he was clad in a golden robe, stately and imposing, guarding a golden fruit that was bigger than any of the ones Yi Futian had seen before. It was releasing a golden glow that covered Gai Shir. Gai Shir seemed to be comprehending something in tranquility. He was not eating the fruit, but was comprehending in front of it. It was not just him, but also other prominent characters were present as well. I never expected the divine tree of comprehension in the legend would actually be true. Wan Shuyi was startled. One could comprehend before the divine tree. It was rumored that in the sea of the path to prove the truth, enlightenment could be obtained before the divine tree, and one could become a Renhuang. Moreover, it was said that the fruits produced from the divine tree of comprehension each contained enough will of the way for someone at the peak of the nirvana plane to cast a divine wheel of the great path. Its will of the way was immeasurable. In another direction, a group came forth. It turned out to be Junmu and the others. Apparently, they had also seen Yi Futian and Wan Shuyi. Junmu's eyes revealed some disbelief. They had also arrived, but going further up was perhaps an impossibility. The people above would not allow anyone to snatch away their opportunity of the great path. Those were the most prominent figures on this trip, including many who were the direct disciples of the divine palace. Wan Shuyi Luoyue, how has your trip with him been? Junmu asked Yi Futian and his party. On this trip, they had profited some along the way. Luoyue looked at Yi Futian and said nothing. If only Junmu knew that Yi Futian was the swordsman who made that strike on Taishan Mountain, she wondered how he would feel. If you want, we still have a chance to join hands to try it together, Junmu continued. Even he was not certain that he could force his way to the top and see the divine tree of comprehension for himself. Naturally, he too wanted to sit under the divine tree and meditate. But those under the tree would not allow anyone to disturb their own meditation, nor compete with them. Therefore, anyone who crossed the boundary would endure their attacks. Infighting already? A cold voice asked. It was from a group of cultivators walking up the mountain. They were from the divine capital of Xiling. With the clashes that were taking place now, all who were victorious would start moving toward this place. Those who came for the trial would eventually appear here. After all, as soon as they arrived, they could see the palace resting at the peak. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yi Futian cast a glance at Luo Yuming. The prince of the divine capital of Xiling seemed to have remembered them. Yi Futian cast a glance at Luo Yuming. The prince of the divine capital of Xiling seemed to have remembered them. However, although death and injury were inevitable in this place of trial, it was still a troublesome thing to kill a prince of the divine capital of Xiling in front of everyone. There were so many people here that it would be impossible to do such a thing without having outsiders find out. To attract the attention of a peak character such as old demon Luo was definitely not ideal. Luo Yuming seemed to perceive something, and his eyes moved toward Yi Futian. He saw that this musician of Taishan Mountain regarded him with an incredibly indifference and contempt. It was as if, in his eyes, Luo Yuming was someone not worth noting. His attitude was condescending. A chilling intention of murder flashed across his eyes, extremely frigid. All the descendants of old demon Luo had inherited old demon Luo's temper. However, although many had come one after another from below, everyone in front of the divine tree of comprehension was still calmly meditating and cultivating, as if immersed in their own perception of the great path. But everyone knew that as soon as someone crossed the boundary, that person would feel the force of attack from above. A while ago, there were already a few cultivators who had perished under these kinds of attacks. "Let's go up," a voice commanded. Not far from Yi Futian and his group, Junmu took few people with him, preparing to rush through. Li Jin and Chen Yu of Guqin Valley followed him, after all, ready to join forces. There was also Ma Yi with a few others. If they joined hands together with Junmu, naturally, their chance of success would be greater. Of course, Yi Futian and Wan Shui had already demonstrated much greater strength than Junmu. However, since Yi Futian had already made it clear that he would not necessarily give them the fruit, that only left Junmu as a partner. When Luo Yuming and the other cultivators of the divine capital of Xiling saw that Junmu and his group were about to move upwards, they also immediately stepped up and said, "Luo Yuming of the divine capital of Xiling wants a space." Anyone who occupied a space above was not an ordinary simple person. He introduced himself by name because with his status and strength, there had to be a space for him. There were also several others who took the initiative to step up and were prepared to take advantage of this opportunity to rush through together so that there was a greater chance of succeeding. Instantly, an extremely arrogant might of the way erupted, and everyone stepped up, walking on the mountain path on their way to the divine tree of comprehension. Above them everyone watched. Everyone who was there was an extraordinary character. Among them were Gai Shir of the Golden Divine Nation, Li Sun of the Divine Swordly family, Chang Fenglai of the Changfeng family, and Qin Zong of the Sky-Burying God clan. There were also several direct disciples from the Divine Palace, each of whom was an extraordinary figure with an exemplary breath. Those who were able to stand there had already experienced a great battle, so if anyone else wished to go up, then they must be even more outstanding than the people who were already there. Otherwise, there would be no place yielded for them there. In front of the divine tree of comprehension, many eyes were now on the place below. All the figures were indistinct as divine will shrouded the void, and the will of the way flowed between heaven and earth. Yi Futian could clearly feel a domineering might brewing, and could explode at any time. These people seemed to have reached a certain tacit agreement. Yi Futian marveled secretly. As his voice fell, he saw several people moved at the same time. In the sky above Li Sun, countless swords manifested, and a sword river appeared directly between heaven and earth, slaughtering toward the sky below. In an instant, everyone was attacked by the sword river. Bang! Luo Yuming was extremely forceful. He lifted the great demonic palm print and blasted toward the sky above, smashed the swords directly, and continued upward. Other cultivators all launched counterattacks to shatter the power of swordsmanship that came for them. However, this only seemed to be the beginning. After Li Sun's sword, Qin Zong of the Sky-Burying God clan turned radiant all over, the starry lights flowing. He took a single step, and ranges of mountains descended from the sky, bombarding the crowds below. For a time, destructive turbulence of methods raged wildly, but this did not stop. Afterward, Chang Fenglai attacked, and Gai Shir pointed downward to unleash the golden spear from the sky. The sound of violent collisions was heard, and under the continuous attacks of several top characters, Many were unable to bear the attacks and retreated from the shock. "There is no place for you here," a forceful and overbearing voice said. And another figure in front of the divine tree of comprehension made a move. That person emanated a terrible breath. There seemed to be a ghostly figure behind him. This apparition merged into the great path of heaven and earth when the other person's palms made a squeezing motion in the air. Suddenly, everyone who was battling below felt that their spirit was being held captive. An extremely strong sense of crisis was born, and their countenance changed. What was this ability that could directly ignore external defenses and attack the spirits instead? The apparition squeezed in the air again. Pooh! Some people vomited blood, their faces pale as sand, and fell to the ground. Others spat out blood, their faces pale, and felt their circulations impeded. "That's his disciple." Many people instantly remembered a man, a great man in the divine palace, who did not have many disciples. His ability in cultivation was very rare and required a very special talent. The person who attacked looked very young. They were fair-skinned like a woman. His demeanor was very delicate, and he had a head of dark hair freely hanging. But his dark eyes added a sense of gentleness. It was a direct disciple of the divine palace by Xiao. He was also brilliant among the direct disciples of the divine palace. But in the battles within the divine palace, he lost to another more powerful person. So he did not get a place and needed to come here to fight for it. But his strength was definitely horrific, especially his cultivation ability. It is the direct disciple of Lord Underworld. Lord Underworld is an expert in methods that directly attack the spirit. It was very fearsome and could kill invisibly. Judging from this person's appearance, it should be Bai Xiao, the youngest of all Lord Underworld's disciples. Although he did not get a placement this time, in time, he will be even more terrible. This trip will strengthen his realm, Luoyue explained. Her father, the city lord of Taixian City, was a disciple under Lord Taixian. He was a prominent figure in his own right, so Luoyue knew quite a lot about the outside world. Yi Futian nodded. There was a strange ability floating in the void, like an apparition that had integrated into the great path of heaven and earth. This may be the life spirit ability, a special talent. He also cultivated a similar ability, celestial soul attraction, which was a mystical way inherited from the celestial gate of vast heaven. But even celestial soul attraction was slightly different from this. As the top principality of the higher heavens realm, the divine palace taught throughout the world, and it was completely expected that there would be all kinds of abilities within the divine palace. After a series of continuous attacks, all the cultivators were now suppressed, and the majority of them were injured. Even Luo Yuming and other cultivators from the divine capital of Xiling were the same, just like Jun Mu and his party. Several of them had been hit hard, and their faces were pale. For example, Li Jian and Chen Yu, who were experts at melody, suffered a great injury to their spiritual powers under Bai Xiao's attack, which directly aimed at the spirit, along with all the other attacks launched at the same time. They were instantly crippled. Jun Mu also suffered a slight injury. He was knocked down by the attack. His expression was unpleasant. Were these people preventing the others from going up? It seems that the benefits have been distributed, and those who arrive later will have a hard time partaking any further. Wan Shui said as he watched the scene play out before him. The meaning of their alliance was easy to understand. The previous battle had determined the power structure up there. Next, they wanted to stabilize the configuration without allowing more players to participate. Even if they were better than the people who were already in it, it was difficult to get up there. It was not as simple as they had thought. At this time, a group of people traveled upward in a flash. The person in the lead was extremely beautiful. It was Lu Qingyao, who had been robbed by Yi Futian not long ago. She looked up and said, "Brothers, may I have a place? Doesn't junior sister Lu just comprehend in the fountain of life?" A young man asked. He was also a disciple of the divine palace. Lu Qingyao's face changed slightly. She turned her head, looked in a certain direction, which was just where Yi Futian was. "It was taken away by someone," Lu Qingyao replied. The people above were silent and looked in one of the directions, and from what seemed to be the top of the divine tree of comprehension, Someone glanced at Lu Qingyao and said, "Sister Qingyao, come up." "Thank you, senior brother." Lu Qingyao nodded and moved upward. "Gai sure," and the others revealed surprise in their eyes. They glanced at the person who spoke. But in the end they didn't say anything. Their silence wasn't entirely out of fear. But the speaker was definitely one of the most excellent people here. If there were a conflict with him, the consequences would be unpredictable. After all, there were still some spaces left in front of the divine tree of comprehension. That fruit of the way then is yours. The speaker pointed to a fruit of life. Lu Qingyao responded by nodding. "Thank you." The looks on the face of the people below were not so good. Such a precious fruit was now distributed to someone just like that? The direct disciples of the divine palace were such good sports. "What should we do?" Little Phoenix whispered to Yi Futian. "I'm waiting for someone," Yi Futian said, and he looked to the side. After a while, there was a figure traveling with a sword, coming toward this way. Upon seeing that figure, Yi Futian smiled. Yaya had arrived. After Yaya arrived, she saw Yi Futian and came to his side in a flash. "You are here." Yi Futian smiled. He took out 2 fruits. One was filled with powerful sword will, and the other contained a strong breath of life. He said, "Eat them first." Yaya looked at Yi Futian. This guy really, she thought. But she nodded gently anyway, took them, and ate them both. Yi Futian had given them for her to eat, so there was no need to be coy. All around, whoever perceived the breath of these fruits, all looked in Yi Futian's direction. They couldn't help but show a strange look. How dare they devour the fruits of the way in front of them like this? Junmu also looked bewildered. Besides the sword-shaped fruit that he had captured from the hands of the divine swordly family, did he also take the fruit of life? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Little Phoenix looked at Yi Futian, unhappy, and gritted her teeth. "This be **starred." Little Phoenix looked at Yi Futian, unhappy, and gritted her teeth. "This be **starred." Before, he was reluctant to give her even 1 fruit when she asked him. But now, he had given 2 fruits to the woman who just came. This was ridiculous. And this woman was not even that beautiful. Wan Shuyi and Luoyue were speculating about the relationship between the two. Shen Jing called her his sister, but she didn't seem like his sister in any way. Path companion? Not really. So what was their relationship? Others also stared at Yi Futian. He tossed out the 2 fruits just like that. Did he have any more on him? That gesture was generous enough. Yaya sat cross-legged, digesting the power of the fruits of the way. Within her body, a powerful sword will and life will flowed back and forth, until the sword will become more magnanimous. The infinite sword will wrapped around her. It seemed to engrave the true will of swordsmanship into the meridians and skeletons of her body, and transform them. Yi Futian looked down at Yaya. Once upon a time at the Battle of the Demon Realm, Yaya guarded him at all costs and suffered grave injury. But she also gained a lot. After returning to the Nirvana realm, it had deepened another layer of comprehension in her cultivation. Her swordsmanship had become more mature and powerful than before, and she had a greater comprehension of swordsmanship. This allowed her to perfect her own attack techniques, such as the sword matrix of the void, making it even more excellent. Now that she had just eaten 2 fruits of the way, it would allow her to advance to the next level in the Nirvana plane. "How many fruits do you have?" Yaya was still cultivating when a voice was heard. The person who spoke was Luo Yuming of the divine capital of Xiling. Obviously, he had some thoughts about Yi Futian. They had not bothered with Yi Futian and the others from Taishan Mountain before, because they were busy seizing this time to raid all the fruits of the way here. But now, almost all the fruit was gone, and all sorts of opportunities had been taken away. Perhaps only here at the divine tree of comprehension could there be a possibility to meditate the great path. But the people above had already made their arrangements, and they were unable to force their way in. Since this was the case, they had no choice but to settle for the second option. Yi Futian looked up at Luo Yuming. There was a bit of coldness in his eyes. He didn't want to haggle with the other, But it seemed that Luo Yuming had plans for the fruits of the way that were in his possession. Quite a lot. Yi Futian smiled at Luo Yuming and said. Yi Futian's answer stunned not only Luo Yuming, but the people all around them. A lot? And he admitted it so blatantly? Was he looking for trouble? Wan Shuyi and Luo Yue also expressed a look of surprise. This guy really was a totally different person from the Shun Jing on Taishan Mountain. The others were also somewhat moved as they turned their attention to Yi Futian. Is that so? Luo Yuming took a step forward, and the demonic will on his body was tossing and rolling. He smiled cruelly at Yi Futian. After these people from Taishan Mountain had fought each other, they were still so arrogant, unaware of their impending death. If so, why not give them to me? Luo Yuming stepped forward and spat with a creepy and eerie tone. Sure, come and get it, Yi Futian replied. When Luo Yuming saw that Yi Futian was so confident in turn, he was a little doubtful. At this level of cultivation, his intelligence should be higher, not lower, right? Then, where did Yi Futian's boldness come from? This stopped Luo Yuming in his tracks, and he seemed to be second-guessing his own judgment. Unless he was emboldened because of Wan Shuyi and the others? He looked at Wan Shuyi and the others, and saw that Wan Shuyi was standing right behind Yi Futian at the moment, which made him even more suspicious. Aren't you going to come and get it? Yi Futian looked at him and continued. Previously, Luo Yuming was not too concerned with Yi Futian, but now that he was being so bold, he was suspicious and dared not act lightly. Of course, Luo Yuming said. And with the will of the way roaring, the cultivators of the divine capital of Shilling around him also released great and strong will. A sense of death rushed directly toward Yi Futian and the others. Even Luo Yuming's eyes released a terrible will of death that rushed directly into Yi Futian's eyes. However, where the dead air entered, it was drowned out by the majestic will of life, and had no effect on him at all. In the old days, when the divine capital of Shilling entered Taishan Mountain, you wanted to experience the cultivation of the disciples of Taishan Mountain. At the time, I had just arrived at Taishan Mountain as a musician. Now that I have learned a few things from Taishan Mountain, I will enlighten you today. The moment he finished, a tremendous sense of will erupted fiercely from him. In an instant, the sky above him shrieked, the sword chi wailed, and countless divine swords were beginning to form. Not only that, but streams of sword will went toward the void, flowing between heaven and earth. Looking up, the currents of sword will were visible to the naked eye, flowed through every space, as if omnipresent. Many looked at the battle here, and felt the magnificent will erupt from Yi Futian. Many showed a peculiar look. Was this might that was released by someone of the unblemished realm? Even someone of the Nirvana plane would not be able to surpass this by much. Furthermore, Yi Futian's vitality was booming. His entire body was shining brightly, dazzling with divine light. At this moment, he was like a divine sword that had been unsheathed. This strong. Junmu and the others were confounded. What was going on? Didn't Yi Futian cultivate in music at the String Pavilion, and then went to Sword Abyss to watch the swordplay by the swordsman? Why was his swordsmanship this strong? In front of Yi Futian, the endless flowing sword will now condensed into a real sharp sword. At this moment, Yi Futian closed his eyes as if he no longer needed to see with his eyes. He no longer needed to use movements to control the sword. Pst! A sharp shrieking sound was heard. It was extremely harsh, and made many feel very uncomfortable. The currents of sword will flowing between heaven and earth formed a terrible sword river of true will, roaring and howling toward the cultivators of the divine capital of Shilling. In this instant, all the cultivators of Shilling felt an unparalleled power of slaughter. It was as if everyone was inside this sword river, and could not escape. People all around felt the strength of this sword will, and many evaded, and gave way to the battlefield to avoid being affected. Yi Futian's body gradually levitated in the air. He sat there in midair with the sword in front of him. As his mind moved, the sword struck. Between heaven and earth, a real sword river appeared, sweeping through the void. The infinite sword will was unleashed at the same moment, cutting through the void. Those Saint Plain cultivators from the divine capital of Shilling were all of a powerful existence, which is why they were given a space to come here. But at this time, under this strike, they all felt inconsequential. The violent demonic might exploded, and darkness shrouded the world. But wherever the sword chi passed, everything turned into nothingness, and all was wiped out. The murderous sword river traversed this space, and sounds of muffled groans could be heard. Many of the cultivators of the divine capital of Shilling stiffened and stood in place, blood trailing down the corner of their mouths, and their faces were pale as sand. And that brilliant sword strike took direct aim at Luo Yuming across the space. Luo Yuming's face changed, because he could already sense how strong this strike was going to be. A terrifying demonic might erupted, and behind him, a body akin to a death demon appeared, and with it numerous death spears were launched. However, under that sword will, there was no way for the spears to gain an upper hand, as they were immediately shattered and pulverized. In this instant, he seemed to have returned to the same scenario that day on Taishan Mountain. Boom! A great palm print of the demon god smashed out, and Luo Yuming rapidly retreated leverage its momentum. But Yi Futian was still sitting upon the void with his eyes closed, and as the sword chimed, he was clearly controlling the sword remotely. The dazzling divine sword was going forward without resistance, headed directly for Luo Yuming. Boom, boom, boom. The sword penetrated everything, and no matter where Luo Luoming retreated, the sword was still right there. Even the currents of the sword will between the heaven and the earth drowned his body, bisecting the void, as if to bury him within the sword. Luo Yoming's face paled. Suddenly a terrifying might of pressure exploded from his body, and an implement now appeared in his hand, emitting the intention of a demonic emperor. Is he looking for death? When people saw this, they exclaimed secretly in their hearts. Sure enough, a destructive divine light of the great path suddenly spilled down from the sky above. It smashed down on that Renhuang implement. The same destructive divine light of the great path also attacked Luo Yuming at the same time, and he was hit instantly. His body fell weakly downward as he kept vomiting massive amounts of blood. The divine palace gave an allotted quota to the top principalities of the higher heavens realm, so that their disciples could come to prove themselves and compete for the opportunity of the great path. It was not an occasion for them to show off with divine implements. Anyone who dared to resort to a Renhuang-level implement would be immediately detected and dealt with, hence the scene that had just played out. It was a wretched affair. Luo Yoming's body fell heavily to the ground. The sword will was chilling, and Yi Futian's sword pointed to his forehead. It was as if with the turn of Yi Futian's mind, hundreds and thousands of swords would descend. It's you. Luo Yuming stared at the sword pointing at him. This was déjà vu, similar to what happened on Taishan Mountain before. This was the same sword as on Taishan Mountain. Actually, it was a more mature sword, except the sword on Taishan Mountain had taken the advantage of the character of the way. The sword was still pointing at him, and Yi Futian didn't respond. Junmu's face instantly became extremely disturbed. But he was not alone. It was the same for several other disciples of Taishan Mountain who followed him. It was the same sword. That extremely radiant sword on Taishan Mountain, at this time was blooming here. How could it be him? Many people felt a little surreal. Li Jin, Chen Yu, and Ma Yi had seen Yi Futian first come to Taishan Mountain. They had watched Yi Futian practice music in Guqin Valley. However, how could he be capable of such a radiant strike by the sword? It was the second level of the fleeting divine sword, the cleave of all things, the allotment of space. When their thoughts turned to this, they realized that Lord Taishan had known all along, and that was why he had sent Yi Futian to accompany them. How many positions do you think this sword deserves? Yi Futian's eyes opened. He didn't bother with Luo Yuming, but instead, he looked up at the divine tree of comprehension. For the divine tree of comprehension, his goal was not simply one space. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.